Hi everyone and welcome to Astrology Sphere. So in this October forecast I'm going to be having a look at some of the key astrological highlights from this upcoming month because it's quite an unusual month for a number of reasons. I'm going to get more in-depth in my extended forecast, which I reserve for members of my website. So if you'd like access to that, then do go to astrologysphere.com/subscribe and just sign up. It's absolutely free. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at some of the brief highlights of this full moon in Aries and the key trends associated with it. Then I'm going to have a look at some of the fixed stars that are associated with it and a brief look at the chart. And after that I'm going to do a quick geomantic reading just to look at some of the key themes that might be coming through in the 3D. So for me, astrology is very much about the 5D, and sometimes the way it translates into the 3D is not always, a direct translation. So I like to use my Geomancy cards just to sort of get a snapshot of how things are looking in the 3D as well by way of comparison. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Let's see what happens, and let's get started. So essentially what we've got here, these are the Arcana of Astrology cards by Goodchild. We've got the full moon in Aries, and so this involves the sun and the moon on opposite sides of the horizon. So usually the moon is rising more or less in the east, and the sun is setting in the west. And the full moon, the moon itself will be in the sign of Aries, and the sun will be in the sign of Libra. So what are the key characteristics of this particular full moon? Well, the first thing to say is that this is really about it operates on a number of levels. So first of all, it's called the harvest moon, and I think on that kind of level it's really about gathering together all the things that we're going to need for the next 3 months. In the northern hemisphere it's coming up for winter, so this is autumn season when we are really kind of gathering together all sorts of supplies and almost withdrawing. This is the time when we tend to get a little bit antisocial, and just as well because new restrictions have been introduced in the UK, which means that it's more difficult to socialize, to congregate, to be out late at night in large groups, and so on and so on. So it really is a time for hibernation in kind of many respects, or preparing ourselves for hibernation. So that's the one aspect to this. The second is that there is also an element within this particular full moon about needing to focus on improving what's not working, particularly when it comes to the overall kind of collective, where we are in terms of the world and what's not working in the world. And I think we're going to see that particularly as we move into election time in the US, and I think here in the UK it's going to be very much around Brexit, and is the Prime Minister doing a good job, a real focus on the economy, because the economy in many ways is the kind of macrocosm of the personal sense of harvest. So it's really about looking at how we use resources and whether they're being utilized as best as possible. I think that's kind of a good way to put this. This is also very much about judgment, so it's also about what we sow we reap, and that's kind of carrying on this theme of justice that the sun in Libra is really kind of highlighting. And this is all about not just a sense of kind of reckoning or karmic retribution. It's also really about correction. So it's about working out what's not working and then taking steps to remedy this. It's about improvements, and I think that comes through quite strongly in the Sabian symbol for this particular full moon, which is a scholar creates new forms for ancient symbols. So within this 10th degree of Aries, we have a lot of themes around originality, innovation, as well as improvement. And improvement here is about improvement on the collective level rather than the individual level, although it can be about that too, because let's not forget that Aries is a very individualistic sign. It's the first sign of the zodiac, and it's really about I am. It's about the individual as separate from the group. However, full moons are always about the sun and the moon being in opposition to each other. So Libra kind of brings in that social element here. And it's not just about the law and about fairness and equality. It's also about kind of reciprocity, mutual give and take. So that's going to be important too. And it's also this idea of I versus, well, not I, it's balancing I versus we in both an individual and a collective sense. So that's going to be really important. The other thing that's quite key to this particular full moon is that the moon will be quite close to Chiron and the Earth, and from that point of view, I think we're going to see some themes around healing nature that are going to come through quite strongly. I think there's a real drive at the moment. Perhaps as the seasons change, we become more aware of our position within the cycle of the seasons, and I think it's going to become really important for us to consider that when we make changes going forward, you know, in terms of improving the way that humanity's kind of going, that we also need to take into consideration that we're not the only beings on the planet, that there are more than human intelligences here in the plant, mineral and animal kingdoms that also need to be taken into account, and that we all live within a kind of an ecological biosphere where everybody has to kind of coexist. And I think that these relationships of kind of mutual reciprocity and coexistence are going to be also highlighted as this particular full moon. So that's another theme that I think will come through quite strongly. I mean, traditionally, Aries is all about, as I say, individuality and wanting things your own way. I mean, this is kind of Emperor energy, or the King of Wands energy in the tarot, and this has to be balanced with the Justice card and also the Six of Pentacles kind of energy. So those are the two sort of oppositions, the polar oppositions, that have to be balanced at this particular full moon. Now, full moons are also a time of culminations or endings, and so in your personal life, this will obviously depend on where Aries and Libra fall in your natal chart. So I'm going to be doing some in-depth sort of full moon horoscopes for each of the individual signs on my website. So again, if you want access to those, then do go and subscribe. So welcome back. As you can see, we have moved back to our chart. So let's do a geomantic reading and see what messages want to come through for the full moon in Aries. So as I say, I always find this useful because even though we might have these pure themes in terms of the astrological transits in the 5D, it's not always the way that it translates into the 3D for various reasons. So I find it useful to have this kind of snapshot of comparison between the pure energies of the planets and the signs, and then how things are kind of happening in the third dimension. Because especially since June and that solar eclipse that we had in Cancer, I've noticed that there's been quite a polarization, quite a discrepancy between the potentials in the 5D and then what's happening in the 3D. So I think it gives us a sense of whether we're in alignment with, you know, with the sort of heavenly energies here on Earth, or whether we need to be doing some work to kind of improve or recalibrate, if you like, to make sure that we are in sync with the planets and the stars. Okay, I think that's shuffled enough. Let's cut the cards. So I won't read all of them. I'll just read those that I think are relevant to the, you know, to the planets, and then what I'll do is I'll pull some trinkets just to clarify if anything seems a little bit unclear, and then at the end I'm going to pull some oracle cards for some final parting advice. Alright, so I'm reading this chart as if it was a thema mundi, which means that I assume that the first house is Aries and the seventh house is Libra, and so on. Gosh, okay. So this is where the moon will be, and this is where the sun will be. Interesting energy. I mean, right off the bat, we've got Tristia, which is all about grief and loss, sorrow, mourning, disappointment, all that kind of thing. So this is air energy, and given that it's in the position of the moon, it seems to be pointing to that, you know, that kind of Mercury and Scorpio energy I was talking about earlier. This need to really delve deep, to allow ourselves to sink into the subconscious, the roots, to really come to terms with and process what's happened over the last 9 to 10 months. Because it's been quite, you know, even though things kind of slow to a halt on the kind of economic level, from a personal level, it's been an enormity of growth. Certainly for myself, I don't think I've learned quite so much as I have in such a short space of time. And I think that that's true for everybody. This has been a real kind of major growth spurt, and I think this is a chance to kind of consolidate and also to just acknowledge what is kind of lost. I don't think we have really acknowledged how fundamentally what's unfurled this year is changed our lives and the trajectory of the human race and the planet. And I think mourning what's lost is always an important part of the process, especially at this time of the year, certainly in the northern hemisphere, where we're moving into the season of kind of death and you know, in preparation, that kind of reset before spring again in April. So I think this points to this energy of you know, needing to sort of take a beat and just acknowledge everything that's happened this year. You know, a lot of people have also lost loved ones, so I think the moon here is highlighting this, you know, grief, loss on a personal level that needs to be processed. And then here in the 7th house we've got Fortuna Minor. Now Fortuna Minor is to a larger extent about support from others, so fitting that it's in the 7th house of relationships. So this is really about protection from people that are in positions of power. It's also about favors from friends, associates, our network. It can be about a shift, a pleasant shift in circumstances. So on one level we could read this as being, you know, if for example you're separated from a loved one, maybe you have split up, or you know, due to stress you've kind of temporarily broken up or separated, something like that. You know, that there is this, maybe this need to consider what you like, where you are better together than you are apart. And not that I'm encouraging codependency here, but I think this is just about that sense of cooperation, that social aspect to Libra, which is all about, you know, quid pro quo, about many hands make lighter work, about particularly partnerships, you know, one-to-one relationships where two can sometimes be better than one, that power couple aspect, for example. You know, and from a human design point of view, certainly it makes sense to say that sometimes when you're with somebody who's got certain centers defined that you don't, for example, that it helps you to switch on in each other certain channels, or you know, or centers that maybe you're not able to sort of operate from a kind of conscious point of view. So in that sense you're better together than you are apart. So I think Fortuna Minor here is talking about support from others, and you know, it could also literally be, if you are mourning somebody, just, you know, not being afraid to ask for moral support from loved ones, from friends and family and neighbors and so on, to help you kind of get through. That's sort of one of the main messages. And then let's just pull some trinkets to clarify. So first, let's have one for Tristia. Interesting. So this is the whip in the Lenormand system. So definitely this could be about relationships where people have gone their separate ways because there was conflict. Very often this can be conflict that has kind of bordered on, in some instances, abuse, but it's certainly about feisty argument, shall we say, which is very Aries actually, if we think about it. You know, Aries is quite feisty, and it is the sign of the ram, and we know the ram does tend to sort of butt heads and be quite hot-headed. So I think this is talking about conflict, you know, potentially in relationships that needs to be addressed or be balanced at this full moon, because of course, as I say, you know, if we think about it, we've got the sun here in Libra, and we've got the moon here in Aries, and it's interesting because this is almost the opposite energy for where the sun and the moon feel comfortable. So the sun is normally exalted in Aries, so it's actually in fall in Libra, and you know, the moon is normally exalted in the sign of Taurus. So here in Aries, you know, it's a fire sign. The moon it tends to be watery, so this is where the sun and the moon feel a little bit out of sorts. They're not in their natural territory. So I kind of feel as though this is about considering the other side of the coin that perhaps doesn't come naturally to us in some way when it comes to relationships and one-to-one connections, and just trying to assimilate the other perspective, I think is probably a good way to put it. Interesting. Okay, so for Fortuna Minor we've got the birds, which I think is fitting. You know, it can be about anxiety and about that kind of nervous chatter, you know, that sort of Gemini energy, but at the same time it's also about conversations, it's about interactions, and of course we've got the two owls and a heart. So I think this is really pointing to this need for support, moral support from, you know, significant others right now. It's, you know, maybe not the easiest time for everybody. So let's have a look at Saturn, because as I say, that will still be quite active, that energy, you know, it's the square between Saturn and interesting. So we've got Letitia here in the position of Saturn. So this is normally about career, about prominence in the social sphere, about fame, success, that kind of thing. Also about leadership. And here we've got Jupiter in Pisces. So Letitia is really upbeat, optimistic, expansive energy. It's very joyful energies. It's expansion on the level of emotion. So I think it's pointing to the need to really do what we can to cultivate joy, which I think was a big message during the last new moon. So I think that will continue into this moon phase, and it will be really important, I think, to try and keep a certain lightness, particularly with that Mercury in Scorpio once it goes retrograde on about the 14th of October. It'll be really important not to get stuck in that quite dark energy, and just to realize that everything is a process and that there needs to be continual movement, you know, as we progress from one phase of a cycle into another, so that, you know, things flow. And of course Pisces is water, so this is flowing energy, this is water energy. So I think interesting. I think what it's saying is, you know, as Saturn turns direct and Mars and Saturn move away from each other, that we need to just kind of go with the flow and accept that what's meant for us won't pass us by. And so if we've been blocked from certain avenues, options, people, then maybe there's a reason for that, and just allow for the kind of natural flow to happen. You know, if we are meant to come into alignment with whatever that Saturn represents, then we will in good time, in divine timing, kind of thing. So let's just have a trinket for that. Yes, perfect. So clover, I think, definitely pointing to divine timing and luck. So as I say, sometimes, you know, sometimes not getting what you want is a wonderful stroke of luck, to quote the Dalai Lama. And I think maybe this is what Letitia and the clover are pointing to, is that if you have been prevented from something or kept from a particular path, then there's probably a good reason for it, a fortunate reason for it. You might be divinely protected, let's put it that way. So rejection is God's protection, as the saying goes. So I think just view things that way. If avenues shut off for you, then there's probably a good reason for it. All right, so that's Saturn. I think let's just quickly have a look at trying to think what else there is that's prominent. I think let's put a trinket for Diadem, that fixed star in Libra, just to sort of see what that self-sacrifice or that sort of service is about. Oh, wonderful. we've got the fish here, and this is to an extent about, you know, kind of, you could say it's about going with the flow, but I think it's also about deferring needs, which is very kind of moon in Aries. So deferring personal needs for the sake of relationships or, you know, a group situation, but you'll be rewarded for that later on. This can be about money too, which is quite interesting. So it's about, you know, I always think of it in the I Ching as being the pigs and fishes. It can be about the catch, of course, if we relate it to 7th house and marriage. So this could be about a soulmate, for example. So, you know, if, for example, you've kind of broken up with somebody, it could be because Spirit is clearing a relationship that's not healthy or that's not working for you, that's not ideal. It's clearing that away so that you can meet somebody that's more of a soulmate, more of a match. That's another way to look at this energy. But as I say, it can also be about help from others, you know, when it comes to finances, for example. But I think we all need to sort of just help each other out a little bit, you know, over the next few months, and just see, you know, exceptional circumstances, I think, calls for a charity on all fronts kind of thing. So yes, that's quite interesting, actually. I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull some oracle cards just to sort of round the reading off. So I'm going to pull some cards from the Wisdom of the Oracle, which is by Colette Baron-Reid. So I think let's just have an energy for the Earth in particular. You know, we haven't really talked about the fact that the Earth is also an important part of astrology. You know, it's at the center of the astrological cosmology, and that's because we are, in many respects, of the Earth. So that also needs to be taken into consideration when we do astrological readings, and I think that's where the Geomancy, I think, is quite good. You know, the Earth is the realm of the 4 elements, but I think what we're going to do is just pull a card for the Moon, the Sun, and the Earth, because of course at a full moon these three line up in a straight line, and the Moon acts as that kind of intermediary, the Earth acts as that intermediary between these two opposing, these kind of feminine and masculine yin and yang energies. Oof. Okay. So one for the Moon, one for the Earth, and one for the Sun. So a change in the wind. That's definitely what I feel. You know, even if we are kind of mourning the end of a relationship, however difficult, we are in transition, and I think that's the best way to see this moon phase. You know, bear in mind that there will be 2 full moons in October, that it will be a very busy month from an astrological point of view, so things will kind of continue to move forward and to shift and evolve, and so it's good to kind of keep in the flow. I think this is good advice here for the way forward, just to try and keep in the flow and to realize that whatever's happening right now is not necessarily permanent. Yes, perfect. So yin here for the Sun. You know, this Libra is, although it's a masculine sign, it's a kind of feminine energy, and I think what it's saying is that, you know, if we compare it to Aries, for example, it's very feminine. It's that kind of receptive, divine feminine energy from you know, from the point of view of Venus versus Mars. And I think that right now it's a very good idea to sort of be receptive, to adapt to changes, because, as I say, it is going to be a very busy month, and I think this is what Letitia here is pointing to, this Jupiter in Pisces energy, is to really kind of go with the flow, to roll with the punches, and not to assume that you know, that everything will stay the same. Oh wow, how wonderful. So for the earth, we've got milk and honey, which I think is so beautiful and fitting. For me, this is the absolute epitome of, you know, the Garden of Eden, milk and honey. And I think, you know, one of the kind of the good aspects about this last year is how much we have become more in tune with nature, with the cycles of nature, with the earth, and with the importance of the earth, how she sustains us, how she sustains life. And so I think that, you know, she will be the great winner of this whole kind of pandemic, which is something that I think people like Zach Bush really helped to bring to our attention, as well as you know, those movies and things that have kind of come out recently about agriculture and so on. I think it was called Kiss the Ground, something like that. So how beautiful. This is about plenty, it's about abundance, and that is what the earth is. She is this abundant, almost kind of empress, this place, this paradise, this Garden of Eden, and we really do need to look after her and just remember that everything that we have on in terms of life we owe to the earth. So you know, even though systems may be changing, politics may be changing, all that kind of stuff, what stays the same is this huge potential for the new earth to be birthed. I mean, isn't it wonderful that we've got this rainbow as well, the new earth to be birthed as a result of this process of kind of undoing but then redoing, you know, in the future. So I think that's really wonderful. So let's end with a Universe Has Your Back oracle, if I can find it. I love this because it just it's Universe Has Your Back by Gabbie Bernstein, and I love it because it's got so much lunar energy on it. So let's just get a final piece of parting advice. A parting message for this full moon in Aries. Bit of a klutz today. Right. Oh, how wonderful. So the universe has my back. So I think this goes very nicely with this yin kind of energy, which is, you know, in a way it's also kind of saying, don't worry if things haven't kind of worked out, you know, with this Trustia energy here. If things seem unfair right now, if there is trauma, difficulty, sadness, financial loss, just know that the universe has my back, and that ultimately things will work out for the best. Even though we can't see it right now from that kind of human 3D perspective, things are probably working exactly as they should when it comes to the soul perspective, and that is what we need to bear in mind, I think, going forward over the next few months, as things become a little bit more volatile from an astrological point of view,